All right, so have you ever had one of those moments on the water, like when you're sailing towards a marker and another boat's coming in hot and you're both trying to squeeze through that tiny space?
Oh yeah, it can be like a nautical game of chicken sometimes.
Exactly. And it's even worse when you're not sure who has right of way or what the rules even say about those situations. Close calls at markers can be a sailor's worst nightmare.
Absolutely. It's like that moment when you're emerging onto a busy highway and someone cuts you off, except with wind waves and potentially a lot more damage.
No kidding. So how did world sailing, those folks who make the rules for competitive sailing, try to make things a little bit clearer, a little bit fairer in their latest rule book?
Well, they actually did quite a bit of work on this for the 2025 to 2028 edition. In particular, they gave Rule 18, the one about mark room, a major makeover. And trust me, if you race, or heck, even if you just want to understand how those tactile dances happen out on the water, this deep dive is for you.
So we're talking about Rule 18 mark room. Sounds pretty specific. What's the big deal with this rule?
Well, Rule 18 is all about making it crystal clear when one boat has to give another boat space near a marker. And they didn't just tweak a few words here and there. They really rethought the whole concept of mark room.
Okay, so what did they change?
Well, one of the most interesting things is that they moved away from just thinking about the physical space at the marker. And they started focusing more on the sequence of how boats interact around that marker.
The sequence. I'm intrigued, but I'm not sure I'm following. Why is the sequence so important?
So firstly, you have to be sailing towards the marker on the correct course,
Mm.
as defined by the race. Then you have to round or pass it as required, depending on what kind of race you're doing, what the course looks like. And then finally, and this is really important, you have to fully clear the marker, meaning you're on your way to the next leg of the race without interfering with anyone else.
So it's not over until you're completely clear of the marker and on your way to the next leg.
Right. Only then can you truly say you've been given mark room.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this is more elegant than the old way. It's like a carefully choreographed dance move, not just a static position. But how does this new definition address those tricky situations that always seem to come up? Like when you've got a strong current pushing you off course as you're trying to round a marker?
That's a perfect example. Imagine you're trying to round a marker, but the current is so strong that it pushes you past the marker before you can even turn. The new definition actually protects you now. Even if you get pushed a little off course, as long as you're ultimately able to round the marker safely and complete that whole sequence, you're entitled to mark room.
So even if you get pushed off course a bit, the other boat still has to give you space to complete the maneuver.
Yes, as long as you're still able to round or pass the marker safely and get clear.
Man, I can already picture this playing out in protest hearings. It's like the rule book finally understands the real-world chaos that we sailors deal with out there. Okay, but we've still got two more big changes to this rule to cover. What's next on the agenda?
Well, next up is something that seems really small at first. It's just a tiny tweak to the language in the preamble of Section C of the rules.
Yeah.
The part that deals specifically with starting marks.
Okay, so what did they change?
They added the phrase, left it astern.
Left it astern. You're saying that's huge EE. It just sounds like some fancy nautical jargon to me.
I know it sounds a bit technical, but now with this new wording, it's crystal clear. Once all boats have sailed past and clear of the starting marker, it removes a lot of the ambiguity about those early maneuvers, and it's going to make the starts of races a lot fairer right from the get-go.
Ah, so no more sneaky tactics before you've even crossed the line. That makes sense.
Exactly. It's all about creating a level playing field.
Okay. We've got one more major change to talk about. Rule 18.1 itself. I have a feeling this is where things get really interesting.
You're right. This is the heart of mark room. And honestly, even experienced sailors used to get tripped up by the old 18.1. There was just so much crammed into that one dense paragraph.
So how did they make things clearer in the new version?
Think of it like this. They took a tangled mess of a rule and gave it a much-needed spring cleaning. They broke it down into clearly labeled numbered sections that tell you exactly when Rule 18 is in effect, and they even included specific exceptions for certain scenarios. It's like a roadmap for navigating the complexities of mark room.
So instead of one giant paragraph that makes your eyes glaze over, you can now pinpoint the specific section that applies to your situation. This numbered breakdown makes the rules a lot more accessible to everyone. Imagine being in a protest hearing, and instead of arguing about different interpretations of the rule, you can just point to the specific section of 18.1 that clearly applies to the situation. It takes the guesswork out of it.
You got it. And that actually leads us to one final and perhaps the most crucial change to 18.1. They added a whole new section, 18.1b, which clarifies exactly when mark room is considered given. And this is where that three-step sequence we talked about earlier really comes into play.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into 18.1b. What was the problem with the old rule, and how does this new version fix it?
The problem was there was just a lot of debate about whether mark room was considered given before or after a boat had fully cleared the marker. It led to a lot of he said, she said situations, especially in those heart-stopping close calls near the mark.
Oh, I know those moments all too well. It's like everything slows down and you're just praying the other boat understands the rules the same way you do.
Exactly. And that's what 18.1b aims to prevent. So the new rule states very clearly that Rule 18 no longer applies between boats when mark room has been given. And remember, according to that new definition we talked about, mark room is only given after a boat has completed all three steps, sailing to the mark, rounding, or passing it, and leaving it astern.
So it's not about whether you felt like you had room or whether you were almost clear. It's black and white. Did they complete the entire sequence? Did they give you the space to do the same? That removes a lot of the subjectivity that used to lead to arguments and protests.
Precisely. This new 18.1b creates a much clearer, more objective standard for everyone on the water. And as we'll see when we get into the more specific scenarios covered in 18.2, 18.3, and 18.4, this emphasis on the mark room sequence really ripples throughout the entire rule. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about right-of-way and safe passage around markers.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into just 3 of the changes to Rule 18, and there are so many more that we're going to cover. And remember, dear listener, this deep dive was just the tip of the iceberg. The new rulebook is packed with changes and clarifications and new interpretations. So I encourage you to check it out, dive into the discussions, and see how all these changes are going to shape the future of sailing.
And as you do that, remember that while the specific rules might change, the basic principles of safe and fair sailing, those always remain constant. Whether you're racing for the gold or just enjoying a peaceful afternoon on the water, it's those principles that make this sport so unique and rewarding.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of sailing's mark room rules. Until next time, fair winds and following seas.